Right now on the southeast side, you can get up close and personal with a museum display unlike any other in the country. When pilots took these two planes together up in the skies, they paved the path for NASA to send astronauts to the moon. I got a tour of the new setup at this corner of the Pima Air and Space Museum. It's a hypersonic machine reunited with its mothership. We hitched a ride to the edge of the 80-acre museum's grounds. Here is where you'll find the smaller, sleek, black X-15 with NASA logos on it, hanging from a pylon of this B-52 bomber.
Now we have a totally singular piece of history that you can't see anywhere else.
Museum manager Brad Elliott tells me it took a lot of work and planning to get this set up. Pima Air and Space hired a company from Florida to make the X-15 replica out of aluminum and fiberglass. It is a faithful mock-up, but the B-52 is the real deal. Elliott says this bomber, loaned from the National Air Force Museum, is one of the original planes that carried this experimental aircraft.
They would fly to 38,000 feet, drop it, rockets would launch, and it would go on to set records for height and altitude. These were our first spaceships.
Having a guide like Elliott or any of the other museum volunteers helps you notice the subtle details. One is realizing the B-52's wing was specifically designed to hold the X-15.
It was always so cool to see the cutout of the wing that they had to put in for the tail of the X-15, but now you get to see the tail of the X-15 there.
Then there's the black markings on the top right side of the high and mighty one. Elliott says each one tells the story of its own X-15 launches and the U.S. government's quest back in the 1960s to reach hypersonic speeds of 4,500 plus miles an hour.
Flight 91, for instance, was the one that set the altitude record, and that's marked up on there. You had the one guy sitting in there, the guy that was risking his life to use this experimental plane.
You can get an even closer look from a different angle at this wooden X-15 model out of the elements inside the museum's aerospace gallery. Elliott says visitors can come here to connect the dots that each of the 199 X-15 flights blazed a trail for NASA to design the Gemini and eventually Apollo shuttle programs to make history on the moon.
To connect the story is really what makes this really cool.
So yeah, Claire, walking out to it just showed you the scale, and to think, it was perfectly connected, and all it took was a little drop to just rush off like a rocket. So by the way, the 65th anniversary of the first ever X-15 flight coming up in 2 weeks, so pretty cool anniversary. In doing the story, I learned two other cool historic nods. So that B-52 and Flight 91 that Brad mentioned was one that actually did 67 miles up, and there's a connection to the space program because one of the 12 X-15 pilots, none other than Neil Armstrong. I think you back home recognize that name for sure.
Just such a cool piece of history, and I love that we can go see that
anytime.
locally.
And Brad was telling me our desert is the perfect place so that none of these exhibits, they can stand out there in the heat, they can stand the desert, the dryness, it all is there for you to go visit.
That's why we have the the plane graveyard too. It makes sense. Yeah.